All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to broadcast out with Matt from HoloChain. And this is the next generation blockchain. I'm going to pass it over to you, Trent. Talk about how you came across Matthew and maybe briefly set some context up on what HoloChain is.
I met Matthew at his hacker house, actually, here in San Francisco. He is a member of the HoloChain group. I got to meet him and several members of his team and really got to understand what they were working on. Out of all the blockchain projects that I've seen so far, they have one of the most unique philosophical approaches to how they approach currency, how they approach the technology, and also the fact that this is real. They've already programmed this code. It's in alpha. They've released software, and they even have hardware.
You brought up a good point, but their team is made up more of data scientists and philosophers, kind of deep rethink on value, currency, and monetary systems, which changes economics in a big way.
It's literally a part of the meta currency project, so that's what they're calling it. This is a reinvention of what currency means essentially to humanity.
Because Matthew does a great job explaining some really deep concepts.
Ultimately, their approach is very radically different than anyone else's. That's why I wanted to interview him. Hi, I'm Trent Lipinski, and this is Greg Kerr, and we are on CryptoDisrupted, and we've got Matt from HoloChain on with us. Hey, Matt, can you tell us what is HoloChain, and who are you, and what are you working on?
So my name is Matthew Schutte, and HoloChain is basically an alternative to blockchain. It's probably the simplest way to describe it. We've created an application framework for running truly distributed applications. And what that means is these are applications that end up running just on the devices of the users themselves, so whether that's cell phones, laptops, etc. And our aim was to create a framework that enabled people to run applications as a community. And key part of that for us was that we were really not all that interested, to be honest, in applications. We're interested in how humans coordinate their efforts. We're interested in enabling people to collaborate in ways where they come together, they're able to play by some set of rules that works for each of them, and they're able to do that without accidentally concentrating power at a group level. So usually when people come together to try to do some work, they set up a company or a nonprofit or a government, whatever, and they almost always put an administration in the middle. And then power concentrates with the group of folks who happen to be administering the larger activity of the system. We were interested in making it so that people are able to opt into playing a game together. And if at some point that game stops proving useful, interesting, etc., any of those actors can go, you know what, I want to step away. I want to take my data with me. I want to take the application. I want to play by some slightly different rules here. And we also wanted those individuals to be able to extend beyond that community how they were interacting with the world. So I'll be able to get into more detail about like kind of the technical stuff in a little bit, but that's a bit of the why. For us, unlike the motivation that was underlying supposedly Satoshi Nakamoto's crafting of Bitcoin and the blockchain, we weren't trying to do digital anonymous cash. We were trying to enable groups to create social coherence, but coherence that worked for the participants themselves and got regenerated on an ongoing basis because it continued to work. And where it stopped working, people were able to go, this isn't working for me, and they can try something different. So we're really looking to foster a bit of an explosion of new types of collaboration. And a key piece for us was that playing by the rules of the game is up to each of the individuals. It's the term that we use is mutual sovereignty.
So can you kind of explain to people like what the difference is in concept between HoloChain and Bitcoin, for example? Bitcoin's a digital currency. It's using the blockchain. So a lot of people have become familiar with what the blockchain means and how that works. But HoloChain uses a very different concept from the way I understand it, at least. Can you kind of go into some details about that?
Sure. So I'll start with blockchain. Just briefly, I'll give like the quick overview. And I'll also start with, I think, why people are so excited about it, or why at least right now people are so excited about it, because they're like, oh my gosh, I can gamble and make a bunch of money. But for the early adopters, at least, and the stuff that was really exciting was blockchain demonstrated that you could run an application without having anyone in the middle. The way I frame it is they did that by putting everyone in the middle. And that's not exactly accurate, because in most blockchains, you have a division of labor. You have classes. You've got full node participants, and then you have people who are not full nodes. They're interacting, but they are not holding on to the records, as it were. Amongst the full node participants, each actor holds on to a copy of everything that everyone has ever done. That's about as unscalable an architecture as you can possibly design. And there was a benefit there. The benefit was by pitting people against one another, and they're, vying to win a lottery, essentially. And the only way to win realistic is by playing fair. They were able to make it so that people could trust in an outcome without having to trust any of the other actors. And so what happened, they describe it as trustless, but what it really is shifting trust to the network as a whole. At one level, that's a really interesting innovation, but it's probably not the appropriate innovation for all variety of distributed computing. It's great if you're trying to enable people to interact without any relationship and without any history or memory. I'm willing to trust the records without having to know anything about the people that I'm interacting with. Great, and it's useful to solve that. But the vast majority of social coordination problems that humans face look nothing like that. Think about if you didn't know what your girlfriend looked like, sounded like, what her name was. Right? How would you know the difference between her and your boss or the homeless guy on the street? And so our lives look nothing like that. And our social systems look nothing like that. HoloChain is built to foster social coordination. And at one level, we start with some different premises. So we start with, one, it should be lightweight enough that everybody can be a full participant, even if you're just showing up with a cell phone. Two, we don't adopt anonymity as a core baseline feature. That doesn't mean that you're putting your real world identity at stake. It just means that you're able to take an action and then take another action and have people go, oh, this is the same guy. So you're able to demonstrate correlations between the activity that you do in an application. This is familiar to us. If I follow you on Twitter, you tweet once and then you tweet again, and then you tweet again, and I assume, hey, that's the same guy because it's the same username. So we use identity in most of our social networks and our real-world social systems. Architecturally, we ended up designing the system quite a bit differently than blockchain because we had these different objectives as our why, essentially. And since we were trying to build up social coherence, we started with signatures and public-private key pairs. So each user, when we run an application together, first thing, that application is its own little standalone thing. It's not running on the HoloChain. There's no single big HoloChain, unlike Ethereum, right? With Ethereum, there's one big chain of computation and history, and then a bunch of applications that run on that. That's not at all how this works. HoloChain is, if we're running an application together, that application has as part of it a HoloChain. And if I'm running a different application with some other folks, it has a separate HoloChain. It's sort of like the data integrity or database backend for that application. The other pieces are if you and I are running an app together, we're running identical code. So if we're doing peer-to-peer Twitter, the code that I'm running and the code that you're running are exactly the same. There's not a single space of difference, right? There's not one extra character. And that makes it so that I know you and I are playing by the same rules. Why is that important? Well, if you think about how a card game works, it would be kind of hard for you and I to play a card game together if I'm playing blackjack and you're playing Go Fish.
Yeah.
Right? So the things that you would be doing that would be perfectly legal in your game would be illegal in my game. And I go, no, you can't do that. And you go, yes, I can, right? And we would suddenly grind to a halt because we're not playing the same game. We're not playing by the same rules. So in a HoloChain application, you know that you're operating in the same space as another party when they are running the exact same set of rules for that app. That app code, the way that you are able to check this is each user has their own log of events or their activity that they've done in this application. We call it the source chain. It's similar to what happens in a blockchain, except in a blockchain, what happens is people are trying to record globally all activity that happens for everyone, whereas in HoloChain, each user is holding on to their own activity. And then we have an additional mechanism for sharing that into a social space. So you aren't holding on to everybody's stuff, you're holding on to your stuff, and then we'll get into a little bit of how you take some responsibility for the shared space.
Got it.
Hey,
yes.
Matthew, I was going to say, so I'm in one of your white papers, which you have many on your website, and there's such interesting reads. It started to talk about this universal principle of taking the perspective of the observer.
Yeah.
And I found that to kind of understand, saying, okay, we're shifting from this grand collective and going back to the idea that you are the most important person in the puzzle piece to yourself.
Yeah.
And everybody else is the most important in the puzzle to themselves.
Yeah.
And this then shifts that, kind of like you're saying, the global blockchain now back down to what's important to you,
Mm-hmm.
and how you then use or have these interactions with the people around you.
Yeah.
Is that a fair kind of like
It is, and there's sort of 2 points that I'll make there. One, we actually, if you compare holochain to blockchain, because we're maintaining the different perspectives of the various individuals, we actually hold on to much more information than a blockchain does. In a blockchain, you have all the different participants observing what's happening from their own perspective, and then in Bitcoin's case, every 10 minutes or so, we throw out all perspectives except for one. And that one gets entered as the official record for the entire community. And so what we've done is we've condensed a multi-perspective system down to a single, this is the network's view on what happened. And so it's a network-based perspective, which is a monoculture rather than a true sort of polyculture or multiculture. That has costs and consequences. One, it costs a bunch to do that, right? There's scaling and the expense and all that sort of is one of the consequences. But two, it actually makes it so you don't have any of that other information to make use of. We called this different way of storing information holographic storage, that each of the individuals sees the world, but they see it from their perspective. They see the history from their perspective based on the experiences that they have had. And we think that holographic storage has a really big advantage. It's basically that because, and I'll take a step back, language is stored holographically. How is English held? It's not in a dictionary somewhere. If it was, you and I wouldn't be able to have a conversation without referencing a dictionary, right?
Okay.
Okay. Language is held inside of the brains and bodies of each of the participants. So you've got English, I've got English, Trent has English. Are our copies identical?
No.
No.
Not at all.
I'm a surfer. So I've got all kinds of words that have to do with surfing, right? I'm a big wave surfer. I surf 50-foot waves at a place called Mavericks. And so when I say, I was sitting under the lip in the bowl and I took a bomb on the head, to my community, that makes total sense, right? And to other people, they'd be like, I have no idea what that guy just said. Holographic storage has a disadvantage. The fact that you and I and Trent don't have identical versions of English in our heads means that sometimes I say something and it results in a miscommunication, right? And if we use additional language and hand gestures, like the story I'm telling right now about holographic storage, we can increase the amount of shared overlap in our mental models to the point where we're able to start coordinating and interacting, and we reduce the amount of miscommunication. The downside is sometimes you have miscommunication. We have mechanisms for offsetting that and improving our ability to build coherence over time. The upside is pretty profound, however. The upside is that you can go off and try something new. And if it proves useful, you keep doing it. Maybe you share it with me and I'm like, that's brilliant. And I start doing it. And I share it with Trenton and he's like, it's brilliant. And he starts doing it. And this insight can propagate across the entire community based on the fact that it proves relevant in context to each participant themselves. But when you went and spent the time to go try that thing out, the only person taking a risk in their time, of their body, etc., was you. Holographic storage, we think, is the key to adaptive capacity because it enables a community to get the maximum amount of learning for the minimum amount of risk. Ants are able to go off and forage, and if they find something, it may end up benefiting the entire colony. But if they die, we lost an ant. We didn't have a catastrophic community-wide collapse. This is how nature does data storage and social coordination. State is always held locally, right? The insight of, does this work or not work, is held locally by each of the participants, whether it's a human or a rock that's heating up in the sun. There is no logging with the global ledger that happens. Each of the cells in your body has their own copy of the instruction set, the DNA. And they coordinate based on the local signals that they get. They get some oxygen and they have this temperature and there's some hemoglobin or whatever, right? And based on that, they check their own instruction set and operate and coordinate based on their own instruction set. They don't have a CEO cell that they check in with. On that basis, that's basically where we were trying to come from. There's a separate thing here that has to do with, okay, so it's useful to have more than one perspective in a system. It also gives you a qualitative difference when you're able to combine those together. The best example of this from my experience is binocular vision. If I've got one eye and I can see the world, it looks one way, and I've got another eye and I can see the world and it looks slightly different, and if I have both of them, all of a sudden I'm able to see depth. It's a qualitative difference when you have multiple perspectives being able to intertwine. Blockchains get rid of multiple perspectives and adopt a single network-wide perspective on history. That actually reduces the amount of richness of information that you're able to generate in your community.
Wow, so there's some biomimicry in the flow of power and perspective built into the system that, once again, mimics nature rather than the kind of the man-made constructs of centralized and approving authorities.
Yeah, and to be totally honest, so this is coming out of a project called the Metacurrency Project. Okay. The technical part of that for the last decade has been a project called Scepter. And Scepter is an attempt to redesign computers and computer networks based on the organizing patterns of biological systems, right? Wow. Of what we call living systems, so systems that have flows. So we've spent, at least the last decade looking at, okay, what are the organizing patterns in nature? Why? Well, after billions of years, they probably work, right? Nature's tried a bunch of stuff, and there's probably some useful insights about how systems organize themselves that lead them to be able to adapt and persist in the face of changing circumstances. And our assumption was, we humans think we're so smart with our C corporations and our representative democracies, these hierarchies. But when you look at nature has found a bunch of really interesting patterns that are probably much more resilient and adaptable and sort of wise than the institutions that we've been coming up with for the last few hundred years. And so from our perspective, we're not inventing stuff so much as borrowing patterns and then trying to see, okay, well, how could we take this pattern that we see in biology and apply it to social interaction? So the way in which DNA, this new way of carrying information that led to organisms that have different shapes, and operate in different ways. When DNA showed up on the scene, it led to an explosion of biological organisms. And lots of stuff was tried and lots of things failed, right? That's the evolutionary process. Generation and curation. We had lots of babies, tall ones, short ones, skinny ones, fat ones. It got cold, curation. Skinny ones died, right?
Yeah.
We are hoping, and HoloChain is sort of the first step in this process for us, but we are hoping to facilitate a new birth, a new medium of information sharing, a medium for coordination that enables a birth of social organisms in much broader ways than we've seen historically. Our take on the way that a social organism or a group of people coordinating in some way, the mechanisms that they use to coordinate are basically signaling systems like currencies. Not just money-like currencies, though money is a currency that matters, but other forms of currency as well, whether that's reputation or names. He's a PhD in mechanical engineering from Stanford, right? I should probably turn to him if I have questions about mechanical engineering. All of those are signaling systems that social groups social groups use to help steer themselves.
Authority is one of those, the doctor example is a perfect example of that. Greg here, he's former Pentagon analyst, so he's got quite a bit of experience in the authority field and how that works.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I want you to explain to us the fact that this is actually real. You guys have actually written code. This is not.
Yeah. This is not pipe dream anymore.
Yeah, because a lot of the people who are in the blockchain space, a lot of people who are in cryptocurrencies, most of them are in the ICO phase still. Most of them are just in an idea phase. So You guys actually have code written. You're actually in an alpha. And you actually have hardware coming out. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about all this and the fact that this actually exists?
Yeah, so probably the first thing to point out is we're operating at a different level. And what I mean is we're actually operating at a much lower level than most of the other folks out there. So often what you'll see in the cryptocurrency and crypto, distributed computing space in general is we're building blah, blah, blah on Ethereum, right? So we're going to do an application on top of the Ethereum blockchain. Or we're building a competitor to Ethereum, which is a type of blockchain. What we've said is, no, we're not building an application on Ethereum. We're not building a competitor to Ethereum, though we're kind of that. We're building an alternative to blockchain. So we're way down here. And we have released an alpha. We call it the Adventurer release because it's for the adventurous. It's early. We do have a working application. It's still buggy and it doesn't have all that many features, but we've got our own barely working version of peer-to-peer Twitter, which fortunately we've had a bit of an explosion in interest over the last month or so. And so we've got about 500 people in our online community.
And changing all their policies. And I mean, that's the biggest issue with centralization is when you're running a centralized system, the person who's in control of that system, that authority gets to determine, what happens on that platform. So
do you want to touch on that? You tell that story. I don't want to tell that story.
So basically, so at least from my understanding of how HoloChain works, because you're using it in a peer-to-peer network similar to like BitTorrent or, using a different networking model, and because you're using a decentralized model, there is no authority to go delete your tweets. So there is no company, there is no Twitter, there is no central server that you can go in and say, oh, I'm gonna go censor Greg today because I didn't like what he said. That doesn't exist. So there is no function for censorship. It's literally not included in the system. So that can completely change the social dynamics of people interacting online because now there's no middleman.
The way that we describe it is it's a technical term, but we use the term unenclosability. Mm-hmm. Meaning that if you and I and Greg want to play a part, we want to communicate using some particular set of rules. We want to play peer-to-peer blackjack or Twitter or Uber or whatever. It shouldn't be that we need permission from anyone else to go do that. That if we want to communicate in some way, and when you think about English, if I wanted to go, and that becomes a new word that I want to use now. If you guys don't like slap me in the face and say, shut up, then we might start doing that. And we don't have to get permission from anybody else in order to do so.
Yeah, I've come up with combating ideas with Trent and other people in our network, talking about how even I was using in terms of the blockchain is more of a place where we're organizing under an idea, right? So we're actually protected under the First Amendment. And I felt like the blockchain was getting hijacked by the finance world. You've seen through the lens of finance constantly and only. And then it was forcing us to kind of start looking at a policy in finance, with the SEC being the authority that's going to get in there and start meddling because of the word currency. And they were like kind of fetishizing it. But yeah, this is kind of breaking it down and just saying, yeah, this is about coming together under a common idea, which we're protected under the Constitution of doing. Henceforth, we make our own rules. And then whatever kind of tracking mechanism we make within our collective understanding, those are more like Boy Scout merit badges than US dollars.
That's
so
right.
If you can't tax a merit badge, you can't tax any kind of like coin system that would come out of this system that you've created, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, political entities in governments, et cetera, they'll figure out ways they'll draw their own lines. There are certainly ways of structuring relationships between people in a HoloChain application that could look more like money, but you don't have to. So similar to me going, Trent picks his kids up on time. That's a speech act. And is it possible that the government could decide they want to tax me speaking in that way? Well, it's possible, but not likely. And one of the ways that I frame this is money is really about enabling us to interact with strangers. Money is really about enabling us to have relationships with people that we don't actually have a relationship with, right? Yeah. Like, hey, I don't know you. Will you make me a sandwich? Sure. Okay, here's some dough, right? And I get a sandwich, And what that person gets is recognition that they have created value for me.
Mm-hmm.
And when they step into a different interaction, they're able to pass along recognition as well when that person creates value for them. And we're willing to accept these dollars because we anticipate that somebody else is going to be willing to accept them as well. But they're really about making visible the ways in which we help one another.
Yep.
It's a one-dimensional way of making visible, right? More money, less money, right? It doesn't have all the richness of an ecosystem, which has much more vibrant and rich forms of signaling, but it's a signaling system. We have other signaling systems as well. And one of the things that's interesting when you start to really poke people on money, you go, oh, so money is how you interact? Oh, yeah, how would you interact without money? Cool. How much did you tip your girlfriend for dinner? She made dinner yesterday? Cool. How much did you tip her? Like, what? No, oh, you didn't tip her anything? Is that because you don't appreciate her? No, because we know from our friend and family relationships that when you bring money in, it's awkward. Money is something you do with strangers.
Yeah.
Money helps you close a relationship, and our communal relationships are actually about something different. Our communal relationships are actually, to some extent, about redefining our sense of self to include that other. Like, it's making ourselves vulnerable in ways that open up and lead us to treat one another like we're part of the same group. It's you and me, baby. And when we start bringing in this tool that's really for a different thing, that tool is for you and I being able to interact without actually having to be vulnerable. It's a tit-for-tat transaction. Then we just know intuitively, like, no, that doesn't belong in the family, that doesn't belong in the relationship. Even amongst friends, you're like, I got dinner this time and you'll get it next time. And most of our friends don't keep too close of an accounting on that sort of thing. So the long story short there is, might the government regulate this stuff? Sure. For things that get more money-like, if it looks like money, they're going to treat it like money. But if it looks like things that enable people to make decisions about who they're wanting to be vulnerable with and who they're wanting to invite into a particular relationship with them, that becomes something much closer to speech or much closer to communal relationships. And I don't see any of the governments I'm familiar with trying to step in there anytime.
I heard the Chinese have announced a plan to start a social credit system. And does this mesh well with that kind of strategic? Terrible. Okay.
So there's been a few different pop culture things that have poked at this idea of the single dimension, fully public reputation currency. One is Cory Doctorow's Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. Fun, interesting book. It's sort of this sci-fi futuristic thing. And there's this concept of woofy. Everybody has reputation. And it's sort of like, how much credit do you have? And it leads to a world that's really kind of awful. Black Mirror did an episode a season or two ago that had a similar, like, you're rating everybody, 5 stars. These are awful. Horrible visions of what the future might look like. And a single one-dimensional public reputation system is a wonderful tool for a totalitarian government to dictate how its citizens behave, right?
Control behavior. Okay.
It is a wonderful tool for controlling behavior. It is not a great tool for helping a community to steer. And this is, so at one level, HoloChain's architecture is really in line with traditional Western political philosophy. Why? Traditional Western political philosophy, at some level, borrows from nature. We go, hey, decision-making is better when it's distributed. We don't want a single tyrant. Part of why we like the market is that it makes it so we don't all have to vote on whether or not the iPhone is the only phone we should all use for the next 10 years, right? We think it's good for people to be able to disagree about their desires, and that actually leads to a richness in that system. When you look at nature, you don't have a converging. There's not all of nature coming to a single perspective. In fact, if you come to a single perspective, you lose the primary thing that nature is good at, and that's regeneration. I'm like, we're deep into philosophy weeds right now, but I'm going to go there anyway.
Go for it.
How does life on Earth persist? What's the primary source of energy for life on Earth?
The sun?
Yeah, right? Yeah. The sun is like free energy, okay? And we're being bombarded by this free energy that basically comes from a bunch of matter like condensing together until it starts, fusion begins, and you've got this big explosion happening, right? But we're sitting in the wake of that. So we're having all of this light just rained down upon us. Now, if you have a cow, and a cow is surrounded by oxygen and water and light, what happens to that cow if there's nothing else?
Will it grow? Yeah.
It's going to starve.
Oh, okay.
Because cows aren't able to turn light into food,
Yeah.
right?
Without the grass,
Okay.
Okay. So let's say you have grass. The grass is sitting there. It's got carbon dioxide and water and light. The grass breathes in the carbon dioxide. The light helps power a photosynthesis process where carbon molecule gets stripped off and it gets bonded to the H2O. We actually have 6 carbon molecules and 6 H2O, and it creates glucose, literally the structure for the grass, right? So it creates these little sugars that is the grass structures, and it breathes out O2. So it breathes in carbon dioxide, strips off a carbon molecule, breathes out O2, and it builds up this grass structure. Cow comes along, and the cow's like, CO2, not food. O2, that's useful, right? And it's got mechanisms for not only breathing that in, but pulling the oxygen into its bloodstream. Water, oh, that's useful. Ooh, grass. And it's got a 4-chambered stomach that can break that grass down and convert that glucose molecule into other things, and literally through water, grass, and O2 build up meat and muscle and bones and milk and O2, breathing in O2 and breathing out CO2. The cow actually manufactures carbon dioxide as part of its process.
Mm-hmm.
It pulls the carbon off of the glucose and attaches it to the O2 molecule and breathes out the carbon dioxide. Well, what does that do? Actually, if you had a grass-only world, very quickly all of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would get converted into O2, oxygen, and the grass would suffocate. In a cow-only world, the cow would starve. But if you have grass and cows, the grass turns CO2 into O2, and the cow turns O2 into CO2. And you're able to have a regenerative cycle.
Mm-hmm.
This ability to have regeneration is dependent on us having different perspectives, us having different organisms that run processes that actually undo the stuff that these other guys did. And our ecosystems are basically built with a whole bunch of these kinds of mechanisms of something transforming a resource and then some other set of things transforming something back so that that process can repeat. If they don't, it goes extinct and will have gone extinct long ago. So this idea of having multiple perspectives, right? The grass sees the world from one perspective, the cow sees the world from a different perspective, is actually critical to our ability to regenerate.
So you guys have taken these concepts and applied them to software, and then you've done so with a blockchain alternative.
Yeah.
Then using peer-to-peer networking models to essentially facilitate the social functions of this.
Yeah, and on the tech side, the way people often will describe us is having taken some of the underlying pieces of blockchain, hash chains, some of the underlying pieces of BitTorrent, distributed hash tables, signatures, and then the application code that's written for that app. And those 4 things kind of combined together enable us to create a shared application space that works the way the users want. And for me, the thing that becomes really interesting here is by building it in this way, one, you don't have to pay other people to maintain the network because the cost of maintaining the network is offset by you showing up as a host as well. So you're a user, but you're also a host. And so you're paying your own way by participating in that system, right? Your phone does a little bit of work. And the basic gist is sometimes when I tweet, it lands on your device, and other times when I tweet, it lands on his device, and other times it lands on somebody else's. And sometimes, Trent, when you tweet, it lands on my phone, and my phone checks, hey, does this play by the rules? Yes, it does. Okay, I'm willing to make that available. And later on, when people go, hey, who's got this? It directs that query to me, and my phone goes, yep, I've got that, and hands them back the content.
And you guys are building a network, right? So there's actual hardware devices that you've also are working on. Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So HoloChain needs no devices, just to be clear. Like, needs no external devices. Just the participants themselves, the 3 of us, we could do this. Ta-da, we're done.
Yeah.
We're building an application on top of HoloChain, which is our first big app, and that's called Holo. And Holo is an incentivized hosting system. And what it does is it bridges between a fully peer-to-peer app, like peer-to-peer Twitter, or a better example is probably peer-to-peer Airbnb, and a web browser. We realized that, look, as awesome as this stuff is going to be, grandma's not going to learn how to do new distributed applications tomorrow.
Yeah.
But grandma's totally used to opening a web browser and typing in a URL. It's something that even she is comfortable with. If you're running peer-to-peer Airbnb, and you're a bunch of hosts who've structured Airbnb so it works the way you guys want it to work, you want to have lots of guests. You don't want there to be some technical barrier to participation. You want to make it so they can book a room by going to a website and clicking book.
Mm-hmm.
Holo is about that. It's a mechanism for enabling the participants in this application to serve out a website, take a booking, and get compensated for having done that little hosting work by the application developer or the community as a whole. Why would this community want to make it easy for guests to book rooms? Because they want more bookings, right? Are they willing to pay for the hosting? Sure. If it's an app developer doing it, they're probably taking a slice of the transaction fees for the bookings, and they're using that to pay for hosting just like they do today. Today, people, if you're an app developer, you probably pay Amazon Web Services to host your application. Well, most of your application wouldn't need hosting. It's run by the users themselves. But when you're wanting to let outsiders visit, in that case, you're going to need to set up something that connects to the centralized world. And so you're going to need some hosting work done. Mm-hmm. Holo is a structure that enables people to do that hosting and get rewarded for doing so. And in order to launch that with a stable foundation, we wanted a network of at least 300. I think we've already sold 500 or 600 devices. We wanted at least 300 computers that were on 24 hours a day on the network, able to do this kind of hosting work. So we launched an Indiegogo campaign at the beginning of the month, looking to sell several hundred Holo ports, are the name of our devices, and raise $200,000. Now, we exceeded that goal in the first 3 days.
That's amazing.
And so, yay. But something to point out is, for us, it was critical that we had a foundation of devices that were high quality devices on the network all the time, able, when somebody goes to ourbnb.co, the website shows up right away, right? We wanted that network to be stable. Mm-hmm. However, anybody can come in with additional, their desktop, their laptop, their server farm, whatever, and add capacity to the network. And what happens is, when your device does some work serving out a website, you get compensated. And you're able to set the terms of the compensation. It'll be a market, so there will be pressures on in terms of, are you fast? Are you slow? Are you up all the time? In terms of how much you're able to charge. We also anticipate people being able to go, you know what, I want to charge for most folks this, but for Wikipedia, it's free. I'll give this much support of Wikipedia at no cost. And we actually see some interesting different sorts of community currencies showing up in that way. But that's sort of a sidebar thing that is in addition to the more monetary style currency stuff that we're enabling through Holo. The one last thing I'll say there is, and for people who are really all about crypto because of the cryptocurrency side, Holo is the interesting thing there. HoloChain, we don't need any currencies. You show up as a user and a host. There's no mining required. Mm-hmm. Holo, however, we don't use mining. We have a mutual credit accounting system so that when you are doing that work, you then submit a log. Hey, here's the work that I did. Can you pay me? Right? And we have an accounting system that it's a mutual credit system, which basically means instead of having tokens that get passed around, you have account balances. And so if Greg did some work for me, I'm an app developer and Greg's machine, hosted some website stuff, I would go, thanks, Greg. And my account would go down a little bit and his would go up a little bit. And so we're recognizing the shift on both sides. And when we do that, I sign Greg's log and Greg signs my log. And if I pretend like that didn't happen, he's got my signature on something. So he's able to go, hey, this guy's being a jerk. He's trying to commit fraud here, right? Of course this happened. And so that's a mechanism that is a little different from the token-based systems that are out there. But that little bit of difference actually enables us to do transactions at 1/10,000th the cost of Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And have them process immediately, and with scale that is in the millions or billions of simultaneous transactions. So far greater than the Visa network.
Powerful stuff. So with the actual hardware units themselves, so is anyone going to be able to download the software, or are you going to have to require the actual hardware that you guys are selling?
Nope, you don't need to have our hardware. We'll see when we first launch in the spring. What early on, we're gonna be doing some testing stuff. So we may have just some testing things happening on only people who have holo ports. But the plan is very quickly after that to release software that anybody can download and start using their devices to earn holo with. And one of the reasons that people are buying the holo ports is not just to try to earn crypto, it's also to have their sort of base footprint in this new distributed web so that they've got their device at home that's doing work. One of the things is I might want to run peer-to-peer Twitter on my phone. I might not want to run peer-to-peer YouTube on my phone because even though I want to watch videos, I don't necessarily want to serve videos. I may want something at home that's being able to serve and get recognized for that service at home. And when I'm using on my phone, I may want to just sort of essentially pay for that access through the work that had been done elsewhere. We also think that people who are setting up business models like that are probably going to do things like paid subscriptions, advertising, all the things that we see in today's centralized web. We think we'll see bits of those show up as well. There's going to be a wide diversity of business models and architectures.
And there's nothing stopping them from using another cryptocurrency. So they could build an application layer on top of HoloChain and then still have a transactional layer that facilitates another cryptocurrency or an existing cryptocurrency or altcoin.
That's right. Although most of the people who have come to us so far, once they wrap their head around what we're doing, they go, oh, yeah, we have no interest in doing those other systems because they're just so expensive, right? Yeah. How much is it right now to do a Bitcoin transaction? Do you know?
Range, it depends on how much you're transferring, but it's about $11 to $12 USD.
Right.
So
if you're doing a little bit of hosting, let's say it's worth a third of a cent that your computer did.
Yeah.
Do you want to spend $11 to recognize that third of a cent?
Probably not.
It just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So most of the folks that have come to us have gone, we want to do a cryptocurrency system for blah, blah, blah. And many of them are looking at this mutual credit architecture. We're planning to launch with our code open, but our license not initially, because we want to hone our own processes and get the patterns right before people go and like basically copy and paste and release a bunch of crap tokens.
Yeah.
we don't want a bunch of like bad versions of this out before we get it a little bit refined. And then, okay, cool. Here's how you do it smart. Here's things you might want to avoid. But by mid to late next year, we should be open source in terms of the licensing. And our plan eventually is to actually architect this. We're planning to do a license called a human commons license, which we mapped out a little bit. It's something we invented. We've mapped it out a little bit, but we haven't fully implemented it. And that's basically something that enables us to treat humans, like real living humans, and non-living persons like corporations differently.
Okay.
So if you're a real living human, hey, you can participate in this thing and be a part of the commons with all the rights. But if you're an organization of some sort, you can't. You have to get a license. You've got to pay. And in part that has to do with us trying to offset some of the imbalance that corporations have a big advantage over individuals because of their scale. So we're trying to counter that a little bit and go, hey, if you as a corporation want your individual humans to be able to own their own work, cool, you can show up like that. But if you, the organization, want to own the work of the people that, if you got some like I pay you by the hour sort of relationship, that's fine. But in interacting with our stuff, you got to get a commercial license. So we're trying to shift some balances there, but that's probably mid next year that rolls out.
So is there a role for blockchain, or have you guys made blockchain obsolete in your view?
There may be a role for blockchain. I don't know exactly what it is. If it's anything, it looks like a gold, right? From my perspective, blockchain is kind of like the best way to remake the old patterns.
Yeah, like we were talking about how it's kind of been hijacked by the finance world. And
it's not that it got hijacked. No? It's not that it got hijacked. It's that it baked them in from the beginning. It was designed to do digital anonymous cash, like cash. That was what they were trying to recreate, not value. Yeah, money. That's different.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't know, what's the value of a rose, right? This is like, It depends on the context, man. You're giving it to your sweetheart that you haven't seen in a long time. You leave it on something that's like got a bomb in it, and it's a fuck you to somebody, right? Like, meaning of that thing depends on the social relationship, and then what the act is. It doesn't have an inherent value in it. It depends on the perspective of the participant, and money sort of ignores that. Money tries to break everything down into more or less, as if it was one dimension, and as if the perspective didn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the context, you're coding in context.
What's $1,000 worth? Well, if you're leaving it on the table of the person that you slept with last night, it might get you slapped, right? Because it shifts what that relationship means. If you're gifting it to somebody as congratulations on your wedding, it's a different thing. Right? So they don't have inherent meaning. So if I'm trying to poke the bear, we think that all the things that people are excited about doing with blockchain, they can do more effectively with HoloChain or some other system that's probably architected somewhat similarly. We think IPFS is great. Not a blockchain. IPFS is a distributed storage system. It enables, it's a swipe at, redesigning the web, essentially. Mm-hmm. And we think that's solid. We built HoloChain in part, we built it using Go. It's a programming language. One of the worst things to Google. Try finding Go when you, yeah. So you have to type Golang. But we did that in part because IPFS did Go. We wanted to be able to play well with them. We see those guys as people who are really sharp and are trying to solve problems for the right reasons. And so we think there's lots of other good projects out there. But the specifics of proof of work, blockchain stuff, and even proof of stake, both of those are architectures, whether they were intended to or not, that concentrate power, not distribute it. Both of them make it so that the early mover has an advantage, and then they're able to extract value and use that to buy more computing power and expand their advantage. It's the finance system of old, just rebuilt using some computers. And so it's not a shock to us that you look and you see, oh, well, there's basically 1,000 people that control Bitcoin or whatever. One of the things that unfortunately counters that, it distributes it to the people thing, is the two classes in blockchain, right? The fact that you have full node participants who are miners and are getting compensated and all that kind of stuff, and really end up dictating to a large extent how the protocol will evolve. And then you have all these other people who are like, ooh, I want to do a transaction. Those people aren't citizens. They're serfs. And what that means is power concentrates amongst those elites who could afford specialized ASIC miners and had relationships with government officials who controlled hydroelectric power in China or whatever, right? All of the wealth and power concentrates there. That's not a mechanism of distribution. And it's a side effect of the fact that blockchain's architecture, because it requires you to hold on to everything that everybody ever did, even when you're doing a really simple application like Bitcoin's a really simple application. Some tokens went from this account to this account. That's it. That's the application, We track things went from here to there. That's the only thing we're doing. We're not doing videos. We're not doing Airbnb bookings. It's just from here to there. Even with that, the size of the chain becomes giant, and the amount of computer power required to be competitive becomes giant. So unless you are really rich, you can't participate. That's a side effect of that architecture of everybody holds on to everything. If you don't have that, then you don't get this disconnect between the masses and the elite. You have, hey, I can run this thing on my phone. We've done tests with HoloChain where we've run 50 separate applications on a single Raspberry Pi. We didn't go into these details too much, and I won't dive into them very much either, but the distributed hash table, basically the way that works in our system is I tweet, and first I write it to my own local chain. Hey, I'm saying, let's go surfing or whatever, right? And then I share that to the distributed hash table. And what that means is it basically, I won't go into all the mechanisms here, but it picks a handful of random folks. It's based on the content of my tweet itself. And it goes and says, I'm going to live here. And reaches out to them and says, can you check this and hold on to it and make it available to others? And then they check their own local copy of the rules. And when they receive that tweet, they go, yep, I'm supposed to hold on to this. Okay. Is it signed by the right guy? Yep. Is it less than 141 characters? Yep. Okay, this looks good to me. Satisfies the rules. And they sign it themselves. Looks like it plays by the rules. And they make it available to others. What that means is if we wanted to keep 20 copies of each tweet on the network, we're going to have 20 different people holding onto my tweet, right? Now, if we have 2 million or 200 million people running peer-to-peer Twitter, great. Each person is holding on to about 20 times an average user's tweets. If I'm tweeting 4 times a day, let's say the average person tweets maybe once a day, let's say, because you got those power tweeters and then you guys like me who like tweet once a year. If you're tweeting once a day, over the course of a year, you're doing 300 of those. Over the course of a year, if you have 20 copies of each, we've got 6,000 tweets on each phone. That's not a lot. That's pretty tiny. And yet you can have something that has millions, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of people running that, and that would still be the load that each user would be required to use. So by making it work on lightweight devices, we actually are able to pull off a distributed system, not just a decentralized one.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about HoloChain, or are you guys doing an ICO, or is there?
Yeah, so we are doing an ICO. So we're doing as I mentioned earlier, we're doing a crowdfunding campaign. That crowdfunding campaign is going for 2 months, and we're selling some hardware through that, and we're also doing some developer trainings through that. Okay. We're using that as a signal to let us know how big the community is going to be. And based on that signal, we're releasing money into an ICO starting on January 9th. So we're going to do an ICO that runs about a month. It's not going to be available in the United States or any of the other jurisdictions that have said, hey, we don't want ICOs. And what we're doing is we're starting out with trying to raise 2.5 million. Oh, we lost Greg.
Yeah, we lost Greg on there.
All right. He'll come back in a minute. I'll keep talking.
Go ahead.
He'll come back in a second. We're looking to raise 2.5 million, and we will increase the amount of fuel, or what we're selling is called holo fuel, the amount of credits that we're offering based on the demand demonstrated in the Indiegogo campaign.
Okay.
So we are trying to do what we're calling an ethical ICO.
Got it.
We're not looking to raise $400 million because we don't think we need $400 million. And this isn't an attempt to cash out. It's an attempt to bootstrap an ecosystem into place. We may raise something in the tens of millions if that demand is there, but that's not just ICO demand. It's got to also be demonstrated through people who are looking to be hosts and build applications. And based on that, we're basically looking to raise enough money to support that ecosystem for a year to 18 months of development. We're going to be launching that whole thing in the spring, but we expect that it'll be maturing over the course of the year.
Awesome. And where can people find you guys?
They'll be able to find us at holo.host as well as holochain.org. For those of you who are interested in learning more about this, finding other people who are interested, building applications, go to chat.holochain.net, and that's HOLOCHAIN, chat.holochain.net. That's our Mattermost community, and we've got about 500 people or so there scheming, building things, and looking to find others that are interested in the same.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today, and it's been awesome talking with you. And yeah, thank you for being on the show.
Trent, thank you very much. It was great to be here.